Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Welcome to another episode of the Damage Report. I am John Arola. We've got a gigantic show for you today. Two main core stories I want to talk about. We're going to be starting off with the latest news and updates on the disappearance and murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist, and the various issues going on around that. We have a little bit of updates from the Secretary of State returning from his trip to the region. We have Pat Robertson, one of the leading evangelical leaders in the country, weighing in on what President Trump should or shouldn't do. And then some actual facts. I know this has been a fact-free sort of thing coming from the White House on this issue. But this whole issue around the arms sales to Saudi Arabia, the jobs that could be created, there's a lot of rhetoric coming out. What are the actual facts behind that? We'll be breaking that down. Later on the show, in advance of the midterms, we've been showing you some awesome political ads over the course of the past week or two. I've got some awful ones for you, and they're coming from a Democrat, by the way, a Democrat running two absolutely reprehensible ads. One of them, I would say one of the most counterproductive political ads I've ever seen. We'll be breaking that down at the latter end of the show. We're also joined by two great guests today. In advance of her appearance at Politicon this weekend, CNN contributor and author Sally Kohn will be joining us. We'll be talking about fake news, what our approach to Trump voters should be, what the most productive course we should take could possibly be. And then later on the show, Robert Naiman, policy director of Just Foreign Policy, will be joining us to talk about the war in Yemen, what possible consequences there could be for the death of Jamal Khashoggi, and all of that a little bit later on. And if there's time, Trump has been doing interviews this week, and he was asked about climate science and what he knows of the science behind climate change, and his response is one of the dumbest things that I've ever read in my life. So hopefully, if we have time, we'll get to that. But we start off with the big story of the day. Every day, more information coming out about the disappearance and likely murder of U.S. resident and Washington Post columnist, as well as general journalist, Jamal Khashoggi. And all of the news has been terrible. Pretty much everyone seems to accept that, except the president and a few of his biggest supporters. So I want to talk to you about some of what the New York Times was able to report. There are now sources that know some of what happened in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul the day that Jamal went missing and was apparently murdered. This information is both graphic and disturbing, so just bear that in mind. Here is what we know happened. After he was shown into the office of the Saudi consul, Mohammed al-Otaibi, the agents seized Mr. Khashoggi. And remember, this is the agents are the 15 people dispatched from Saudi Arabia, including close aides to the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. They seized him and immediately began to beat and torture him, eventually cutting off his fingers. This is apparently information coming from audio recordings that the Turkish government has that we have not yet heard. Whether he was killed before his fingers were removed and his body dismembered could not be determined. The source also says that the forensic scientists that the Saudis sent started to cut him up while the journalist was still alive, and the killing took 7 minutes. So there's a bit of a disagreement there. But it is believed that this was not, as the Saudis are now apparently considering, there was a bit of a trial balloon that this was an interrogation that just got out of hand. Maybe he overdosed or something like this. No, apparently he was beaten, he was tortured, including with the bone saw, and there's the possibility that his body began to be dismembered and cut up while he was still alive, although possibly drugged. A bit more really disturbing information about, I guess, the casual way that this team went about murdering this dissident and journalist. That forensic scientist apparently put on earphones and listened to music as he dismembered Khashoggi's body with a bone saw. He advised other squad members to do the same, saying that this is one of the ways that you get through this sort of business, is listening to music. It helps to relax you as you are torturing and murdering this person. So this information is out there. I have not heard the audio tapes. No one in the media has yet. It is likely that members of either the CIA, FBI, possibly Secretary of State Mike Pompeo might have access to that information. If these tapes come out, it is going to make it even harder for Donald Trump to plot the course that he's been doing, trying to maintain the status quo with Saudi Arabia, either for the financial interest of the United States, which is what he wants you to believe, or his own family's personal financial interest, which seems more likely to me. But we don't have that information yet. We don't know for sure that we ever will. And with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo now returning from the region, his initial statements, granted he will be doing interviews throughout the day, don't give me a lot of cause for hope on this issue. Here's one of his big quotes this morning. As we make a determination for ourselves about what happened there, based on the facts that are presented to us, the United States will determine what the appropriate response will be. That is a statement that he could have made about any issue, about any country. It says nothing. It gives you no indication whatsoever of what's actually going on in their minds. The strongest evidence, I guess, that there is some concern about MBS's involvement in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi comes not from the State Department, but from Steve Mnuchin, who tweeted that he would now not be participating in the Future Investment Initiative Summit in Saudi Arabia. That's the big international economic summit that the Prince of Saudi Arabia set up. So Mike Pompeo, very reserved with his words. Donald Trump largely speaking out in support of Saudi Arabia. Only Steve Mnuchin actually, I guess, speaking with his actions rather than just with words. Although he's a terrible guy, so don't give him too much credit there. Now, that said, the things that Donald Trump has said about the disappearance and murder of Jamal Khashoggi, I think should worry everyone. His willingness to accept just whatever MBS says about that situation follows a clear pattern in his dealings with other dictators over the past 2 years. If they deny having done something, if they deny having committed a crime, he is simply going to accept it. He even has put forth his whole, you're guilty until proven innocent thing coming out of the Kavanaugh hearings. So, look, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that we already have, incredibly worrying details about the disappearance and murder of Jamal. Enough that I think reasoning people can understand that the regime of Saudi Arabia not only had the motivation to do this, but they had the team in place to do it, a team that was in Istanbul for only a few hours. Incredibly suspicious. The likelihood that Saudi Arabia was not involved, or if they were involved, that MBS didn't know about it, seems very hard to conceive of. And yet Donald Trump has been willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And very often lately, when talking about why we shouldn't jump to conclusions, his argument is that we have this massive arms deal, an arms deal that he trumpeted at the time as this massive thing, over $100 billion. And it's not just a dollars thing. He wants you to believe that this is a jobs creator. At the time, this was profiled on John Oliver's show this Sunday. He had this big chart, a map of the United States, talking about all of the jobs in each state that would be created. When the White House was asked for the source for that information, they could not provide any source. And I think there's a pretty good reason for it. The evidence that this arms deal with Saudi Arabia, despite its large price tag, will actually produce almost any jobs really doesn't exist at this point. And it's grown to comical proportions lately. So let's talk about some actual facts on the US defense industry. As of 2016, the private US defense industry employed 355,500 people, which sounds like a lot, but it's less than 0.5% of the total US labor force, still a lot of people. And that is a very generous definition of that industry. That includes every person whose job depends directly on the sale or production of airplanes, tanks, bombs, and services for the entire US military. So you're talking about both the actual production of the weapons themselves, services provided to the military, that's everything, okay? Only about 7,666 workers were making bombs for the defense and law enforcement industries in 2016, and that includes all the explosives that our own military use. So 355,000 workers overall, less than 8,000 in bomb making. A large portion of what we're selling to Saudi Arabia is bombs. So this one deal, how much do you think that's going to grow that 7,600 workers? Do you think it's going to add 10%, maybe 15%? It's certainly not going to double it. It's not going to triple it. And even if it did, that would be a negligible increase in jobs, not even worthy of notice. Overall, 355,000 people work in making arms for all of our deals everywhere and supplying our own military, which I'm sure you know is the best equipped and highest funded military in the entire world. The idea that this $100 billion deal is going to drastically grow that number, or that if we lost it, it would drastically shrink, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And they've provided no reason to believe that that would actually exist. So although obviously morally, it's a reprehensible argument to say that we should allow dictators to go around the world murdering dissidents and journalists to save jobs in the defense industry, at the very least, if you're going to make such an amoral argument, you could have some facts to back it up, and they don't even have that. But even worse, Donald Trump now isn't satisfied with just telling you that there will be some jobs. He had a headline on Fox Business that I saw this morning. He says that Saudi Arabia has a, quote, tremendous order for weapons that can create 500,000 jobs. Well, we just went over the numbers. The entire U.S. private defense industry employs 355,000 people. Do you really believe that we're going to more than double our entire industry thanks to this one deal with Saudi Arabia? Nobody believes that, except Donald Trump and apparently Fox Business, because they ran that headline without any fact-checking whatsoever. All of these numbers that we presented to you are publicly available. You can find them, you can check them yourselves. You can see, okay, that's 2016. Maybe way more people work there now. We don't have that data, but someday we will. You can check that. The idea that we're gonna get 500,000 new jobs is a complete fantasy. It is literal fake news. But we might allow the dictator of Saudi Arabia to literally murder US residents in the pursuit of these farcical jobs that will never actually materialize. And I want to turn to one other thing here. It's bad enough when politicians in the US are using these supposed jobs in the defense industry to justify allowing Saudi Arabia to murder journalists. But now they're getting support not just from the secular world, but the religious world as well. Pat Robertson is one of the most influential evangelical leaders in the country today. Here is what he had to say about the situation.
I just want to cool down the temper of those who are screaming blood for the Saudis. Look, these people are key allies. Our main enemy in the Middle East is Iran, and the Saudis stand up against Iran. And I know that Wahhabi faith that they practice is obnoxious, and what they've done in relation to women is obnoxious, and some of their courts are obnoxious. But nevertheless, I don't think on this issue that we need to pull sanctions and get tough. I just think it's a mistake. Behind the scenes, the president can talk to the king and say, look, you've got to cool this thing and get it straightened out. But as he said, we've got an arms deal that everybody wanted a piece of. It's like, what is it, $190 billion? It's huge. It's not something that you want to blow up willy-nilly.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be. Featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity, the UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
So it's always exciting when they say the thing you're supposed to say in private publicly instead. That is not like an arms dealer that just said that. That's one of the leading evangelical figures in American Christianity. And that is what evangelical Christianity is worth politically today. Oh, you know, this Muslim regime, I'm from the point of view of him, this Muslim regime is going around and killing US residents, but we got an arms deal and everybody wants to get a piece of it. He's talking about it like he's a mafia don. This is a religious leader justifying the murder of these journalists so that somebody can make a little bit of money in arms deals. Or, you know, as Jesus says, love your neighbor unless someone's selling you a bazooka, and then maybe you gotta whack the guy. That's what we got going in America. We've got Donald Trump on the secular side justifying the murder of dissidents and journalists to advance his own political agenda and probably his financial dealings as well. And then backed up by evangelical Christianity making the case for having no morals whatsoever internationally if we can sell a few weapons. Okay, we do have to go to our first break. When we come back, we will be joined by Sally Kohn, CNN contributor and author, who's going to be appearing this weekend in LA at Politicon. We're going to be previewing a few of the different panels she'll be on and talking about the future of American politics after this. Welcome back to the show. This weekend in LA is Politicon, the big gathering of those on the left and the right and the center to just punch each other in the face as much as they can. And we're lucky to be joined by one of the big participants at this year's Politicon. Sally Kohn is going to be joining us, author of The Opposite of Hate, host of the State of Resistance podcast. Sally, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm not ready to be punching anyone. I'm going to the wrong conference. Nice to see you.
Well, and you have the credentials to say that because you actually have a book sort of specifically about how we're supposed to be moving past that sort of thing. And I do want to talk about your book, but I also want to preview some of the different discussions that you're going to be involved in. So you have one with Scotty Nell Hughes called "Should We Hate Trump Voters?" So, I don't want to do like a big spoiler or anything, but should we hate Trump voters?
Well, I mean, this is my actual book talk. I think it's Sunday afternoon. I'm doing so many things at Politicon, I'm going to lose track. But if you're going to go to one, go to that one. They said, let's do a book talk about the opposite of hate. I said, well, the problem is nobody ever thinks they're hateful. They think hate is somebody else's problem. Turns out it's all of our problem, not to the same degree, not in the same ways. And so I knew a conversation like that would draw people in. And look, people ask me all the time, like, if I'm not supposed to hate, so does that mean I can't hate Trump? So look, if you have to hate someone and you're going to hate Trump, fine, I don't care. But you don't have to hate his followers, right? Because they're more than just who they voted for in 2016. By the way, I'm more than who I voted for in 2016 too. And they're not him. And also, right, there's a moral component to this. Do you really believe in treating all people equally? But there's a practical aspect too, which is, look, do you want them to be Trump voters again in 2020? And I don't. And I've never met anyone who changed because they were hated into it, right? The way we engage people, the way we change people, the way we bring them along is not by hating them.
I certainly agree pragmatically with you. You can't like force a person to change their mind. I do agree. The one, I guess one of the complicating factors is, I think, obviously, psychologically, the left and the right has some fundamentally different values and ways of approaching the world and other people. And so, your sort of stance of wanting to be more understanding, willing to listen, whether based on, a values thing or a pragmatic thing, and you're combining both, it seems like it's rarely matched on the right, that there aren't a lot of voices that are, becoming high profile by saying, hey, maybe the libs aren't evil. Maybe they're not trying to destroy the country and flood it with illegal immigrants. Do you think that in a way it can be sort of a unilateral surrender, or are works like yours helping to encourage those on the right to do the same?
Well, I mean, I hope they are, right? And I've had some encouraging conversations with folks on the right who are, and they are out there. They exist. But, the fact of the matter is there's two reasons I hold the left sort of more accountable. One is because I'm actually a member of the left, card-carrying, rank-and-file member of the left. And I believe that that's where I can have the most impact and change. And that actually we do too much of scrutinizing the other side and not holding ourselves accountable. And I actually think we need to do a lot more of the opposite, being a little more generous to whoever it is who's different than us and we may not see eye to eye with or be the same as, while scrutinizing ourselves and our own community more. But the other aspect is, look, I know why I'm a progressive. I'm a progressive, supposedly, because I believe in the equal dignity and humanity of all people. Now, if I say that, right, it's usually what I actually just mean is I believe in the equal dignity and humanity of my people and the people who aren't being treated equally and fairly, and right. And that's important, by the way. And the problem is, I don't actually think both sides are equal offenders when it comes to incivility and injustice and cruelty and hate and dehumanization, demeaning people. I don't at all. And them doing it doesn't make it okay for us to do it. And if we really believe in the equal dignity and humanity of all people, then do we actually act on that and enact that for all people, including the people who disagree with us, as opposed to letting their bad behavior define our values, which seems to me giving them even more power than they deserve.
I don't disagree with you, and I do see that happening, and it does worry me because obviously, while I'm worried about what's going on while Donald Trump is president, I'm also worried about what we'll be left with once we moved on from him.
Right.
But one thing I want to talk to you about is so you have this book and sort of the driving philosophy behind it. In previous years at Politicon, you've participated in high-profile debates. A few years back, you
God,
you
don't
debated.
remind me.
Well, no, I mean it's Politicon season, so I have to. So you
No,
debated.
I know. Go there. Yeah, I did.
You debated Ben Shapiro, and so what do you think about what seems to me to be a rising tide of more and more of these sorts of debates going on? That you can't watch, an online video without a pundit challenging someone else to a debate. Like you want to bridge divides between people. These debates are often pitched as a way to do that. Do you think that in practice they actually do?
Look, I don't know. I mean, first of all, that was definitively one of my lower points, performatively and intellectually. He mopped the floor with me. It's not, and partly that's because, I kind of, I guess I'm naive or something. I show up prepared to discuss the actual topic we've been told would be the topic, and he got a few good sucker punches in. But all's fair, right? I would say in general there is a disturbing trend that's happening, and it's being pushed by people on both sides, but more often by folks on the left, that we shouldn't even engage with certain people because of some of their hateful views. Now that's complicated, because what do you do with someone who is extremely anti-immigrant and extremely, and very pro-gay rights, or vice versa? And how do you parse that? And how do you decide where the line is? It's also hard to sometimes draw that line in the center left. Look, the truth is I'm a free speech absolutist, and I do believe ultimately that more speech, that speech is the answer to hate speech, that good speech is the answer to bad speech. But sometimes I'm not gonna lie, especially in this moment, whether we're talking social media or cable news or debates like these, where it just all feels performative.
Yeah.
And not actually trying to have. I've had some really meaningful, thoughtful conversations with folks on the right where I feel like I get to say what I want to say and make my points, but I come away with more understanding of their viewpoints. Not agreement, but understanding, which is very valuable in democracy. Yeah. And increasingly, we don't have spaces for that because everything is 4-minute segments or 140 characters or, a cage match, in a dramatic setting. And I think that's really unfortunate. I'd like to see more of that happening.
Yeah. Even this is an 8-minute segment, basically. I wish that we had more time. And I feel like, as an example of this whole thing, like I feel like you showed up that year for a debate the way people say they want debates to be, and he showed up lying about his goal. The only goal of so many of these debates seems to be so that you can justify a headline that says you destroyed somebody.
And you know what? In fairness, he did. It was all right. It was like there were a lot of variables and whatever. It just. Listen, we can't all have our best moments, right? Yeah. We can't all be at our best all the time. It's fine. Yeah. And look, and there've been moments since, and I'm sure I'll take crap for this, but there've been moments since where Ben Shapiro has tweeted something or said something that I agree with and will say as much. And vice versa, by the way. There have been times where, right, and that's in the cesspool of Twitter. So look, we all have a choice. I mean, listen. Ben Shapiro is an extreme example. Donald Trump is an extreme example. The problem is here's what really is the danger, right? Is that it's when Ben Shapiro's viewers or fans are watching how people like me treat him, or Donald Trump's voters are watching how people like me talk about Donald Trump and by extension him. And again, this is a choice. It's not a mandate. I know it doesn't feel fair. I know it's a big burden to shoulder in the face of so much injustice, and especially people on the left being on the receiving end in the present and in the past historically of so much of that injustice. Yeah. And I am committed to actually trying to find the best in people, in part because that's one of my core values. I believe in redemption. I believe in change. It's why I do the work I do. I wouldn't have been an organizer. I wouldn't be doing media work now if I didn't believe that people can change for the better. And so, look, it's not always easy. It's not always pretty, but I try to create those invitations and opportunities for change, especially for the people who are watching at home, especially for the people who are on the fence. Because I think we think everyone who watches Hannity is Hannity. Everyone who voted for Trump is Trump. It's not true.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that is certainly a noble goal. So you're going to be appearing in multiple panels. No, I don't disagree with you.
I don't disagree is one of my favorite, like 21st century phrases. I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying I don't.
Okay, then let me reword it. I do agree, and I don't envy you the struggle you're engaged in, that particular aspect of this this whole overall progressive job we're doing. So Sally Kohn, CNN contributor, author of The Opposite of Hate, appearing multiple panels at Politicon I believe it's in Pasadena, right? It's in LA generally.
You know what? No, it's in LA. It
is in LA this time? Okay, good.
That's where I'm showing up. So just come, and I'll be in a parking lot if there's no Politicon there.
Awesome.
Hey, I hope I'll see you there.
Thank you. Hopefully see you there, Sally. Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Dave Chapelle wading into political waters in support of Ben Jealous, a friend of the Damage Report. We'll be breaking down what he said on the other side of this break. So Ben Jealous obviously engaged in a big governor's race, and he's getting a little bit of star power, actually. Not us. Although he has been on the show multiple times. Dave Chapelle, who I am a gigantic fan of, has been showing up at multiple events with Ben Jealous recently. And not too long ago, just a couple days ago, Ben Jealous and Dave Chapelle were actually on CNN with Van Jones. And Dave Chapelle, in joining with Ben Jealous, was asked about the Kanye West summit at the White House. And here's what he had to say.
First of all, Kanye is an artist, man.
Yes.
And he's a genius.
Absolutely.
Whatever he's saying right now, I think that the angle he's seeing things from is about the division that he sees. And he's not inconsistent with what he's saying. For instance, a decade ago, I read a quote where he said he wanted to take the Confederate flag and reappropriate it some other different kind of way. I mean, it's a MAGA hat, whatever, man. The thing that's scary about this presidency is after it. I don't know if you've been married before or had a girlfriend and said something in a fight that was so wrong, and then after that, we still family, we still around each other, but man, I sure did say all that shit, didn't I? And I'm not mad at Kanye. That's my brother. I love him. I support him. I buy his albums.
No claps! Oh man, that was rough.
I know, whether people clap or not, But, I don't have to agree with everything that he says. I just trust him as a person of intent. But, he shouldn't say all that shit, but.
I love when Dave Chappelle finally gets to the point, basically. Yeah, he shouldn't have said that. So I think Dave Chappelle is I love Dave Chappelle's political analysis generally. He's a very thoughtful guy, obviously. Whether you agree with him on specific political things, he obviously thinks a lot about this stuff. And I've been engaged in a multi-year attempt to, whatever little bit of influence I have, to encourage him to get back into doing videos and engaging politically. So I'm glad that he's doing this. I think he's giving Kanye West probably a little bit too much credit in what Kanye West's mission is. I don't think that this is exactly what Kanye West is doing, but I like what Dave Chappelle is sketching out there. I want people to be worried about that. I was actually just talking with Sally Kohn, and we were talking about, obviously, we're in this period of division with Donald Trump, and that's an issue. But I'm also worried about what is going to come after. I lived through the George W. Bush years. There was a lot of fear-mongering and division. But I don't know that you had as powerful and vitriolic a Fox News as you have now, buttressed by these right-wing websites that are spreading absolute propaganda on a daily basis, demonizing the left. And obviously there's some of that going the other way as well. I think that's a little bit understandable when you've got Proud Boys rampaging through the streets and other patriot prayer groups stockpiling sniper rifles. But I am worried about what we'll be left with when we finally wake up from this national nightmare. I think there's going to be a lot of lingering hatred afterward. And we do need to address that. We need to worry about that and think about it ahead of time. I just don't know that Kanye West is necessarily the person that's going to help solve that problem. Dave Chappelle on with Van Jones also asked about the Me Too movement, and here is what he thought.
Yeah, I think that for most men, especially the men that I'm talking to, one, I'll tell you that as a movement, it's effective. Like in Hollywood, the man, they are buttoning up.
Which is good.
Yeah, it's better than good. It's necessary. Two, I'll say that there's a lot of men that are learning for the first time the extent of the plight of the women in their lives.
We're just learning that consent is important. Most of our states, they don't teach consent when they teach sex ed. Think about that.
That's right. And this is a tough discussion, but it needs to be had. Yeah. And people need to learn the lessons, and we need to listen to one another. I think that some people are so threatened by the movement, or they're so worried about it, that they're not hearing the messaging behind it. But I think it's an idea that's time has come, and we'll see.
Did you?
So Dave Chappelle has been attacked at multiple points for jokes that he's made about various elements of this. So I like that he's making clear there that he is totally on the side of the movement and all that. But what I want to talk about is the last comment that he made, that, you know, like some men, obviously, and some incredibly powerful men are feeling so under assault from this entire thing that they either cannot understand the actual goals of the movement or choose to pretend that they don't. That is not a new thing. It's not unique to this issue. We see the exact same thing with the NFL protests, people fighting back against the movement, but not the actual movement, the movement that they want to pretend that it is. And we see that with the Me Too movement as well. And I think that has been exemplified perfectly in the nomination hearings of now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, where you saw not just conservative white men, although dominantly conservative white men, fighting back against what they see as out-of-control feminism that is really just a recognition and a reckoning with the history of sexual assault and sexual harassment in this country. But they see it as like a demonization of being a man. And there's so many voices on the right that are trying to make their careers right now on that sort of issue. Even established ones like Piers Morgan, we were breaking out earlier this week, think that that is their route to increase relevance and fame and money. And I share the same concern that Dave Chappelle has, that a lot of people seem to have tuned out on this issue. They refuse to simply accept the stated goals of those who are leading the Me Too movement, women who are expressing what actually happened to them. They don't want to hear about that. They don't want to think about that, especially if in hearing about that, you potentially jeopardize positions on the Supreme Court and other powerful men and things like that. So Dave Chappelle also commenting on, early on, you probably remember him saying that we should, on SNL, we should give Donald Trump a chance if he gives us a chance. So Van Jones on CNN asked him, has he given us a chance? And this is what Dave said.
It's hard to tell where Trump ends and his constituents begin, but I think that the rhetoric of his presidency is repugnant. I just don't like the way he talks. I don't like, there's certain... We're living in a time where there's got to be a little more cultural sensitivity. And even a guy like me that's just writing jokes, I have to listen more than I've ever had to listen because the gripes is coming so fast and furious. And I'm not dismissive of people's gripes. It might sound like it on stage, but I listen. And as a president of a country that's as eclectic as ours, you look around your crowd, you see it's like a patchwork of people. I just think that he's speaking to a very small choir. Mm-hmm.
So he went on to say he shouldn't have said giving him a chance. Obviously, he received a gigantic amount of criticism for saying that. I think what he was calling for was just a slight bit of open-mindedness to the results. He wasn't advising people early on that, hey, after all the stuff that Donald Trump has said and already done, that you should potentially think about supporting or voting for Donald Trump. He never said that. But now he seems to have, he seems to regret at least the way that he expressed it at the time. And I agree, like again, Dave Chappelle has been criticized for his views or comments on various groups in America, and he is in this process of learning. And you can see that in his comments there. But the problem is that we're not all doing that. It's not like all segments of America are trying to learn, trying to be more open-minded and more tolerant. And that is a gigantic problem that I think that we need to reckon with as a country. That said, we do have to take a break. When we come back, Robert Naiman, policy director of the Just Foreign Policy Group, is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about conflict in Yemen, Saudi Arabia's role, our role, and how the death and disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi might influence the future of that. After this. Joining us now to help break down the situation in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and the possible future of our involvement with those countries, Robert Naiman, Policy Director of Just Foreign Policy. Welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
Glad to have you here. So I want to start off, I want to lay the stage for the possible developments in the future. What do you see as the gap between what the average American citizen thinks is happening in Yemen with Saudi Arabia and our involvement, and what the actual state of that conflict is today?
Well, I think that the most important things are the following. First of all, U.S. participation in this war is unconstitutional. It's never authorized by Congress when it began in March 2015. Second, the United States is directly participating, contrary to the lies of the Pentagon and official Washington, for 3.5 years. The United States is refueling the Saudi UAE warplanes the middle of their bombing runs, providing target information. We just learned that former US Special Forces have done assassinations. And that's on top of supplying 60% of the Saudi weapons, and on top of blocking resolution for ceasefire at the Security Council. And they're using US diplomatic weight to defend the Saudi regime. So this is a United States war in every sense. Congress can stop it by reasserting its constitutional war powers. And that effort is underway right now. Again, Bernie Sanders in the Senate, Ro Khanna and Mark Pocan in the House, as in the Senate, voted in March, failed to end the war. Now we believe that we have the votes to end the war when we get a vote next month. That's the second important thing. This war is unconstitutional. Congress can stop it. We believe we have the votes when we get a vote, and we saw in March that we can get a vote in the Senate. We need pressure on the House leadership to get a vote in the House, and that means getting more people to co-sponsor the bill to show the momentum. Last thing, this incredible historical moment that we're in right now because of the Saudi regime's assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. We're seeing a Me Too-like re-examination of the U.S.-Saudi relationship in the U.S. media, in the government, even in culture. U.S. museums reevaluating, U.S. businesses reevaluating their relationship with Saudi Arabia in light of this spectacular display, which people who follow this, the U.S. government knew the Saudi regime was psycho after 9/11. This is the capstone of a series of events that show how out of control the Saudi regime is and how the U.S.-Saudi relationship is. But now it's like a moment of the truth is for all to see, like we're all looking at it once. And this is the moment where we should take advantage of this to fundamentally divorce the United States of America, the government and the media and business and the society from the sick Saudi regime and end this sick relationship. And the first key step is to end U.S. participation in the war in Yemen, end the war. And this is urgent and immediate because millions of human beings are on the edge of starvation thanks to the Saudi war and blockade. So this isn't something that we should do in February. This is something we must do in November to save the lives of innocent Yemeni civilians.
So possibly standing in the way of that divorce, though, while many people seem to be reconsidering this relationship, Donald Trump's every comment seems to be supportive of MBS, the continued involvement in that conflict. He talks constantly about how awesome this arms deal that's coming up is. How much hope do you have that the changing tide outside of the White House will actually be able to pressure him to actually divorce from Saudi Arabia?
So thank you for that question. This is really key. This is a time that everybody in the United States needs to remember our high school civics. This is not about Donald Trump. Under the Constitution of the United States, under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, Congress, not the president, decides when the United States goes to war. We need a majority of the Senate and a majority of the House to vote to end U.S. participation by invoking the War Powers Resolution. Trump doesn't have anything to do with it. And the same is true of the arms deals. Congress can vote them down. In fact, right now, the key arms deals that Trump wants are already blocked in the Senate. We're already blocked in the Senate before the assassination of Khashoggi. Corcoran, Republican chair of Senate Foreign Relations, said this stuff is already blocked. In fact, he said, I told the company, stop bringing new deals. Senate's not going to approve them now. So people need to take the red pill and remember that this is not actually about Trump. This is about the United States Congress voting this stuff down, voting down the war and voting down the arms deals. It doesn't matter what Trump says or thinks if we have the votes to end the war in the House and the Senate.
Well, Robert Naiman, Policy Director of Just Foreign Policy, thank you for breaking down how this is likely to play out in the future. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to take a last break of the hour. When we come back, we've got some absolutely horrendous campaign ads for you. And this time, it's coming from a Democrat. The midterms are on, and as you're probably aware at this point, this is not a good year for Senate Democrats. The Senate map in general is just really bad for the Democrats this time. And look, I'm a realist. I don't envy the job of a Democrat running for Senate in a hard red state. But there are good ways to campaign, there are bad ways to campaign, and then beyond that, there's ugly, awful, counterproductive ways to campaign. And we've got an instance of that today. So Joe Donnelly in Indiana, he is in a pretty tight race. He's up like 4 points over Mike Braun, with a Libertarian candidate taking 7 points as well. The Democrats thank that Libertarian candidate in this particular case. He released a couple of ads. I want to show you one. It is not only a bad way to win his race, but probably likely to hurt other Democrats around the country, as you'll see.
Socialists want to turn health care over to the government.
Over my dead body.
Some in Congress want to let insurance companies deny coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Not on my watch.
The radical left wants to eliminate ICE.
I support ICE in funding President Trump's border wall.
Extremes on the left and right want to cut defense spending.
I don't want our troops in a fair fight. I want them to have the best. As President Reagan said, peace through strength. I'm Joe Donnelly. I approve this message.
Now, as far as I've been able to see, I've been doing research. That is not a deep fakes like creation. That's actually Joe Donnelly. He actually made the ad. He's actually running as a Democrat. And aside from maybe the reference to protecting pre-existing conditions, I don't know how else you would have gotten that message if you hadn't been paying attention to the dynamics of that race. That is an ad that his opponent could easily run. It literally quotes a Republican president. You couldn't find one other person that was not actually elected nationally as a Republican to quote in your ad. But of course, it's on purpose. He chooses the most hot button issues, directly reinforces and advances right-wing narratives on those issues, directly attacks other Democrats running, some in hard races of their own around the country, providing ad fodder for their Republican opponents to run against them in ads, calling them far left radicals trying to destroy ICE, calling for the building of the wall. He's not on the border, it's freaking Indiana. What are you even talking about? Except, of course, trying to slide by in a difficult race by pretending to be a Republican. And for those of you who've been following politics for some time, how does that generally work? How has that worked for Senate Democrats in races like Joe Donnelly is in past elections, where they pretend to be a Republican to try to get Republican voters to vote for them? How would you imagine that would actually work? Now, I understand many people watching this might not be in generally red states, but if you are one of those Republicans and you have a person like Joe Donnelly who is saying he agrees with Donald Trump on most of the issues, constantly trumpets that he voted for him 62% of the time, talks about all the issues from their point of view, and then you have a Republican running against him, for what possible reason would you vote for Joe Donnelly? Why not just vote for Mike Braun and get the real crazy right-wing thing? I don't know. Maybe you could ask Joe Donnelly and find out. He's got another ad, though. This one not quite as bad, although, again, it is attacking other Democrats, but in a particular way that you'll see it sort of ties in with some pop culture stuff near the end. Take a look at this.
For the most part, I'm an easygoing guy, but not when Mike Braun keeps lying about my record. I split with my own party to support funding for Trump's border wall. The liberal left wants to chop defense spending. No way. I'm not into a fair fight. I'm about giving our troops the edge.
I'm Jonah Ryan. And I grew up right here in the awesome state of New Hampshire, the granite state of the United States.
So whether he intended to or not, he directly duplicated an ad from Veep, I believe. And again, that ad is that's a Republican ad. And if you like that and if you find that appealing, okay, that's fine. Go vote for a Republican. Joe Donnelly still identifies as a Democrat. I'm sure that deep down he's got some reason for it, but if he does, he's not making that clear in any of his ads. And again, it's not just that he's not doing what's necessary to win his own tight race. He's making it more likely that these sorts of things will be used by people like Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham and all of them in ads to attack other Democrats running, again, in some difficult races of their own. This is not just poorly a waste of money and all of that. It's incredibly counterproductive to the entire mission to flip control of the Senate and the House. That said, thank you for watching. Big show today, obviously. Tomorrow as well. We'll see you then. Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Derola. I'll see you soon.